Thanks a lot for joining us today, Murray. You've been up to all kinds of wonderful things in the last year or two and put out a ton of awesome aquaponic education for people around the world. I know we've had multiple people tell us already over the course of the conference that you were one of the first resources that they were able to learn about aquaponics. And we really do thank you for taking the time to join us today.
You're welcome, Steve. It's good fun to meet again. Actually, we've met several times at various conferences around USA, haven't we, in the past? So it's all good. And yeah, so Aquaponics is marching on, and we're just so happy to have been part of it for quite a long time now. And yeah, I don't know what you want me to speak about today, but I thought I'd just do a little bit of our history, perhaps, what we've done. Is that okay?
Yeah, why don't you do that and then tell us a little bit about maybe some of the different fruiting crops that you've had a chance to work with. I know you don't have the ability to work directly with cannabis yet in Australia, but you have worked with a lot of other crops that are essential oil producing or have very similar desires in terms of essential oil production or secondary metabolite production, similar to cannabis. And we'd love to learn more about that as well.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll just first start with how we started. We started 15 years ago. It's now almost 16 years, actually, that we first found aquaponics and was completely intrigued by it at the time. And we're not the first people in the world to do it, that's obviously for sure, but we're certainly the first in our part of the world. And you know, I came across it by a guy who was wanting to get me to build him a boat, because I'm actually a boat builder by trade, and he wanted me to build him a boat. And like a lot of boat guys, he was complaining that he had to go further and further out to sea to catch his fish, so that's why he wanted a bigger boat. But in that conversation, he described to me aquaponics. He didn't call it aquaponics, but he described it the way that you could grow fish and plants together, and I thought that was absolutely astonishing. So that very day I started, and it was just such an interesting ride, because we didn't have any information much available to us at that particular time, believe it or not. If you did a search in Google, and Google was brand new just then, many young people don't even know that. They think Google's been around forever, but it was still very young then. And if you did a search for the word aquaponics back 15, 16 years ago, there was only one page of returns, whereas now there's, you know, several thousand pages of returns. So, you know, it's been a very interesting ride, the interest in aquaponics. And of course, I think there's a big future for aquaponics grown, a big future for cannabis grown aquaponically. And I know there's a lot of people doing it. Steve would have a much better idea than I have that, and what's happening there in America in particular. And as he said, in Australia, we still can't do it. They're trying to legalise it, but unfortunately, Big Pharma has got a hold of it, Big Pharmacopoeia, that is, pharmaceuticals. And they've basically convinced the government here in Australia that the only people that are safe to be allowed to do such things are them and their particular cohorts, whoever they might be. And yeah, so that's how it's happened in Australia, unfortunately. There are some farms popping up here and there, cannabis farms being grown mostly hydroponically, unfortunately, not aquaponically. And that's what's happened to us. When I first started traveling to America, which was probably 13 years ago, 12 or 13 years ago, I first started going there doing seminars. I would be asked often by students in the class, you know, and the code I discovered for growing cannabis then was, they'd say, can you grow really, really, really good tomatoes in aquaponics, which was a bit of a joke, because as we've since discovered, of course, that tomatoes and cannabis, have a very close relationship as far as nutrient needs are concerned. So we've had quite a few students have told me since that if you can grow good tomatoes, you can usually grow good cannabis as well. So that's a clue. And I know in the hydroponic world, they go on a lot with all the different additives you've got to add. But of course, when you do aquaponics correctly, you don't have that problem. It becomes much easier to do. But of course, you've got to get the aquaponics operating correctly in the first place. Okay, so that's been our journey. 15 years ago, I started, and I was asked first to go to America by a lady named, I can't think of her name right now, it's gone out of my head. What was her name? Sylvia Bernstein, that was her name. And she started a business in Boulder, Colorado. And she invited me to come over to America. And of course, the whole idea then was a bit strange to me. And she'd come across me on a website that I'd built to discuss aquaponics things. And back then, the only people who were around that really had a decent website were Nelson and Pade. They were around in those days, and they've been around for a very long time. So we couldn't get the URL aquaponics.com because they'd already got that, not that long before us, evidently. And so we're aquaponics.net.au, which is the Australian extension is AU. Funnily enough, we have a lot of Americans who are afraid to put that in because they get AU mixed up with RU, and they think it's Russia. How can I say R so Americans understand it? RU, will that get it through to you? I don't know, but we're not Russia, we're Australia. AU, aquaponics.net.au. Anyway, I first started going to the USA doing 1-day and 4-day seminars back then, 13, 14 years ago that was. And Sylvia Bernstein hosted me. So that was really good. We had a great time doing that. And of course, I said to her when she invited me to come, I said, if you pay, I'll come. And she paid, so I came. And the first 2 seminars we ran were in Boulder, Colorado. And the second one was in Oceanside, California. And we did that on the same trip. And we had a great time. It really was really good. And that's how we started our American journey. And of course, then for about 4 or 5 years, I went to the USA about 6 times a year, doing seminars all over the place, from Florida to California and all sorts of places in between. We've been to Oregon a number of times running seminars there. And so we had a great time doing all that. And of course, then we were instrumental, in fact, myself and 2 ladies and another guy from out there. I can't think of his name right now. His name is Mr. West. I can't think of his name. We were the 4 that started off the Aquaponics Association. We actually formed it, got it running, and we held the first Aquaponics Association conference down in Florida. I can't remember the year offhand, but that was something to do that. And it kind of was the first thing that started to pull the aquaponics world together in the USA anyway. And the way we started off, we imagined it would be a worldwide organization initially, but then later on, some of the members wanted to change that to be America only, which was always a disappointment to me. But anyway, that's what happened. And we've seen the Aquaponics Association rise and fall a few times since, but it seems to be going okay now. And it's a good thing to be a member of that. And that's where I've met Steve most of the time, I think. Steve, isn't it, at the Aquaponics conferences?
Oh, actually, I think the first time I met you was back at Sylvia's. The first time, yeah. And then later on was through the association. Yeah, both of us are members of the association. And I think that was the last time I saw you in person was in Kentucky at that conference.
Yeah, that's the last time I've been to the USA, actually. I haven't been to the USA since then. Of course, COVID has kind of knocked that around a bit. We had several, seminars booked for various places around the world, and we had to cancel them all, unfortunately. But a little bit before that, my youngest daughter was had breast cancer, and that was where my relationship with cannabis started as a method of controlling pain, because unfortunately she passed away ultimately. But we managed to get some cannabis oil for her, and I was one of those guys that thought that anyone that smoked cannabis was a bit of a nutcase, Sorry, Steve. And that was my whole impression of the whole cannabis world until my daughter was struck down with cancer. And then we began to realize the benefits of cannabis as a pain relieving thing. And she was, I'll just tell you, cannabis lovers, a bit of a story about that. She was on the best pain care that you can possibly get in the modern world. And yet she still was unable to sleep very well, say 2 hours a night, 3 hours a night, if she was lucky. And this was in the last kind of 12 to 18 months of her life. And then we obtained some cannabis oil, which was extremely difficult, I can tell you. Here in Australia, we had to, go off to a place in Australia. Some of you may know the name of it. I can't think of it right now, sorry, but a little town in northern New South Wales where it's kind of known for the hippies hanging around and doing all that kind of thing. So we went there and walked the streets and asked all sorts of people where we could buy some cannabis oil. And I guess I looked a bit too regular. A lot of them thought I was a policeman in disguise, I think. And we had a bit of difficulty, but finally we tracked some down. I got it back to my daughter, and just with one small drop on her tongue that night, she slept for 8 hours. First night, 8 hours of beautiful, beautiful sleep. And so I can personally attest from personal experience the benefits of using cannabis oil for the alleviation of extreme pain if you're a cancer sufferer. I can tell you that from first-hand experience. yeah, so that was an interesting thing. So I became much, much more interested in the kind of things that Steve Dredd had to say, because it became very obvious that this had a massive future in the alleviation of pain. And I'm still disappointed, I've got to say, with my Australian friends here that have gone to a great deal of trouble to try and get cannabis going here in Australia publicly, but it still hasn't happened. Not really. It's sort of getting there, but not really, unfortunately. We're not even allowed in Queensland to keep a few plants for our own use. Just, you know, if we want to keep them for our own use, it's really bad, really. But anyway, there you go. So, yeah, so that's where, going back to our travels in teaching about aquaponics, and I visited all sorts of places, the USA. I went across Europe to places like Hungary and Portugal, to Africa, both South Africa and other places in Africa, South Korea, Oman in the Middle East, Morocco, and Bahrain. These are places where we've been and done seminars, which is pretty good. And of course, that's led to us then designing our aquaponics design course, which Steve mentioned earlier. And I'm not here to advertise that, but it's very successful. We've been running that now for 5 years, and we've put just over 2,000 students through that around the world. We've had students now from 124 countries do our aquaponics design course. We've also had some pretty remarkable people come out of those courses, and this is the most encouraging thing to me, is to see that we have students that have gone out and done absolutely remarkable things. They really have. The one that first comes to mind is Arvind Venkat, which I'm sure, Steve, you might remember him from going to the Aquaponics Association conferences. Arvind is an absolute standout. He's built farms now for other people in Oman, Saudi, Bahrain, Canada, USA, building large farms, usually half acre or more in size, and they are all running successfully. And I'm proud to say he uses our exact methodology that we teach in our courses. So we can say without any fear of any contradiction from anyone on the planet that our methods actually work, and they work successfully. So aquaponics is here to stay. There's no doubt about that. And, you know, if you are a person who wants to grow food without the use of, you know, chemicals such as agricultural chemicals, that is, I'm talking about, then you can do it with aquaponics, and you can grow cannabis that way and grow it very successfully. Okay, so our masterclass is going really, really well, although it has dropped off a little due to COVID, unfortunately. The three largest groups of students we've had have been Australia first, second is the USA, and third is India, believe it or not. And then we have a smattering of students from all other countries around the world. The Indian cohort has dropped off dramatically since COVID. I think that's because they must be short of money or something, I don't know, or they've had a massive amount of deaths, but they were a large group of students that we don't sort of have so many of them anymore, which is a bit of a shame. But anyway, that's what's happened with the Aquaponics Masterclass. A bit later on, if I've got time, I might show you a couple of slides out of that, just so you can see what it looks like. Going back to some of the successful students we've had. We had a couple of young fellows from Korea from South Korea, come down to my place here in Brisbane about 4 years ago now, and little quiet guys. They sat in the class and didn't say very much, and off they went back to South Korea and decided they'd set up an aquaponics farm. Well, it was about 2 years later that I first heard from them. They started sending me emails inviting me to come up and look at their farm. And I must be honest, I wasn't too keen to fly all the way to South Korea and stay in a hotel and all that stuff on my own dime. It's different when someone else pays for it. You can be a bit more enthusiastic about going somewhere, but when you have to pay your own way, you think about it. But anyway, they kept nagging me to go there. And finally, they sent me some photographs, so I decided, yes, I would go. And when I got there, I saw what these guys had created. At that particular time, when I went there, they had taken over disused greenhouses that were disused from the cut flower industry. And you may or may not have noticed, but around the world, in the Western world anyway, generally speaking, the cut flower industry has really been decimated by cheap flowers coming in from South America and also coming in from China. And in Australia, that's what's decimated ours, is Chinese flowers coming in here on a daily basis being flown in. So there's a lot of disused greenhouses around. And it's a good tip for anyone who wants to start growing, you know, your cannabis or whatever, and you want to get a greenhouse. Have a look around, start driving around your district near you, and just open your eyes and look for greenhouses that are not being used. You'll be surprised how many of them you see. And I like to give the example of when my wife and I bought our last car. We decided we wanted a Toyota, and we decided the model we wanted. So we went off to the dealership, and the first dealership we went to had a great deal for us. That was actually a fantastic deal on a demonstrator, and it was painted this yucky gold color. It was an awful color, actually. And we thought, we can't drive around in that. It looks awful. But the deal was so good, we finally bought that particular car. And strangely enough, when we were driving it home from the dealership, we saw at least 10 or 15 other gold Toyota Camrys painted the same color. So it just illustrates that you often don't see things until you're interested in it or you come across it. And that's the experience we've had lots of students have when we tell them, go look for greenhouses. You've probably driven past ones that are disused and you haven't even noticed it, but take notice. And you can often go into these farmers, especially if they're old family businesses, which a lot of cut flower businesses are, especially here in Australia and the USA. They're businesses that were started by grandpa, was handed down to grandson and so on. And they own the land and they own the greenhouse, and they're just more than happy, a lot of them, to lease you a perfectly good greenhouse and saves you buying it. And you think about it, you've already got electricity, you've always got water, you've always got the greenhouse. And it's a great way to get started. We find a lot of our aquaponics farmers have started that way now. Anyway, that's what these two boys in Korea did, these two young men. They found some disused greenhouses in a part of South Korea, which is about an hour's drive out of Seoul, the capital city. And when we got there, we landed, when I say we, myself and Frank, the guy that does our videoing for us, when we arrived there, we were amazed to discover they had 15,000 square meters under greenhouse doing aquaponics. Now, in square feet for you Americans, that's 168,000 square feet under greenhouse. An astonishing achievement for these two quiet young guys. And they had gone back there and set out to do it. They had no funds. The only other experience they had, they told us, was they'd been growing. They actually went to university together in Seoul in South Korea, and they shared a room together at university. And they said they grew some stuff in their room. I don't know what that would have been, but they had some experience in growing stuff in their bedroom. So they knew a bit about hydroponics, obviously. But anyway, they decided to do this whole system in aquaponics. And they were doing that 168,000 square feet. I couldn't believe it. I was actually blown away, I've got to be honest. Anyway, those boys have since expanded. When I was there, they had a staff of 60 people working for them. And there was 4 people just on IT, doing nothing else but IT. They'd set up a website and they were selling their produce every day, just like an eBay store. They would harvest very early in the morning, and whatever was coming out of the greenhouses would then be uploaded to the store. And people would order just like you order on eBay, and the stuff would be dispatched that afternoon. Out it went. Fantastic operation. So there's 4 people just doing that. And of course they had, another thing I found was quite interesting. They had one staff member whose entire job was to take cold water to all the workers in the greenhouses. How about that? I imagine having a business where you have to have a water carrier. Yes, and their turnover at that time was 1.5 million US per month. 1.5 million US per month. How about that? An astonishing success story. And just to let you know how they did that, how they got their funding, was they went back there and they decided they'd do a Kickstarter, Korean-style Kickstarter, and they thought they did their budgeting and they thought they would ask for 750,000 US, whatever that is in Seoul, in Korean currency, but they asked for 750,000 US. And they put their Kickstarter up and it was fully subscribed in 48 hours. How about that? So that's what they did. And then they thought that worked so well, let's do it again. So they did it again and they raised the second 750,000 US. I think the second lot took 3 or 4 weeks for them to get that, but that's how they got their funding. And then, of course, after they actually started, they had come on board several investors who came on board, and they were very, very well funded. And as we always tell our students, one thing to ensure your success in an aquaponics grow project is to make sure you've got adequate funding, because a lot of small businesses fail, and they fail because they haven't had enough funds to get them through to profit. That's why they fail, which is very, very sad. But that's the one, most one. We've got some messages popping up here. I don't think they're for me. I think people are having a bit of a conversation all their own. Yes, they're having a conversation all their own. Anyway, there you go. So that's how that was an amazing success story. And I know now they've now expanded even further, taken on more greenhouses in the area, and they're just going from strength to strength. We also have Arvind Venkat has built a great farm in Oman, and I've had the pleasure of going there 3 times and having a look at that. And the first farm was 600 square meters. What's that in square feet? I think about 3,000, maybe a little bit more than 3,000 square feet. And that was built at the request of the investors who wanted that built first up to run right through a whole 12-month cycle in Oman, because their hot summer days can be up to 55 degrees centigrade, which I think is about 132 Fahrenheit, something like that. So extreme heat in the greenhouses. So they wanted to build just 600 square meters to see how that would go. Well, they ran through a whole year and it was hugely successful. So they then built it out to 1 acre under greenhouse. And that is running very, very successfully as well. And they've got a really good captive market there in Oman, because Oman's one of those Middle Eastern countries that's just barren. You have to see it to believe it. It's just barren, rubble, dirt, sand. No, nothing grows, not even proper salt bushes. So they import 100% of their food every day, gets flown in. Can you imagine that? Being that dependent on other people for your food, that a whole nation has to fly all its food in every day. And there are other Middle Eastern countries that are like that. If they didn't have oil, they would have nothing. It's really a very precarious situation to be in, I think. But anyway, that's why their aquaponics farm has been hugely successful, because everything they can grow obviously is sold locally. And it's extremely fresh because it's grown there locally. And they grow lots of kale and lettuce of all kinds, tomatoes, all the usual stuff that you'd want to create a top-class salad anywhere in the world. So that's a great success story as well. The same with the farm in Bahrain that's been built. Just going back to Oman, there's another group of investors now that the project has already started. Arvind is now building it out, in the process of building it out. And that's a $9 million USA project, $9 million USA. So that's completely in a very large concrete warehouse. It'll be under lights, run that way, and fully air conditioned in order to have total control of the environment. What an amazing project. Imagine that, a fully air conditioned warehouse with lights running to grow leafy greens and tomatoes and all the usual stuff, cucumbers, etc. And I think we've caught wind of one that maybe started soon there for cannabis. I think it's still a little bit up in the air. It's early stages of inquiry. And of course, then we've got Canada. There's a couple of smaller projects in Canada. Another one just about to start now. In Australia here, we've just completed our second farm here in Australia. You might think, why haven't we got more in Australia? Well, I don't know. It's just us Australians, I think. We're just slow to take things up. We're certainly not slow to take up vaccines, though. We're getting vaccines left, right, and centre. We've also got people who have built successful farms in South Africa, and that's really good. A successful farm in Portugal, and so on it goes. And we can really boast of our success in that regard. Okay, has anyone got any questions for me?
Let's see here in chat. There was a question, what type of fish do you recommend?
Well, here in Australia, we run one called jade perch, which is a really good fish. It's got the highest concentration of omega-3 fatty acids of any fish on the planet, a long way ahead of North Atlantic salmon or any of those kind of fish. So we like to run that fish because it's an Australian native. It's also available across Europe and across Asia. It's been exported up into China and up into Thailand and Malaysia and places like that. Oh yeah, I forgot we had a small project in Malaysia as well that's going okay. Yeah, so it's not yet been exported to the USA, and I can't understand why. It would be, we often get our students ask us about it. Where can I buy jade perch in the USA? Well, no one's imported it yet. And the unique thing about jade perch and some Australian natives is they're very, very hard to breed. So it's a golden business for someone who wants to set up a hatchery, a fish hatchery in the USA, and breed jade perch and sell them. People have to buy new fish from you every year, and so on it would go. It's a really great business waiting to happen in the USA. Yeah, jade perch, and of course across the USA people use all sorts of things. Tilapia is probably the most farmed fish anywhere in the world by a long way, followed in Europe by carp of all kinds, and of course catfish of all kinds. Every continent on the planet has its own variety of catfish. Over there, I think you've got what they call channel catfish, which seem to go quite well in aquaponics. And of course, you've got crappie fish and bluegill, and you've got a golden perch as well. And some people up in Canada and that use Arctic char. So there's a huge variety of freshwater fish that can be used around the world in all sorts of places. So that's a good question. Thank you for that one.
Let's see here. Is there any design? Oh, you know what? Let me ask you a follow-up from last year. You did a bunch of testing with some of the sand beds stuff and some other things. Last time I talked to you, you were just setting that up. What was the conclusion on that?
Yeah, it's running very well. The sand system's now been running just over 2 years. We've done lab tests now about every 4 or 5 months. We send off water samples and leaf samples off to a lab and have them analysed for nutrient. We've never, ever, ever added any nutrient to that system. And this goes back to the work of Dr. Mark McMurtry, if any of you like to look him up. A very interesting man, to say the least. And he wrote several papers, probably about 40 years ago. It was when he first, maybe even a bit longer than that. He was attached then to Cornell University, I think it was. And his burden was to be able to create an aquaponic system that could be run in third world countries. So the idea was to run it on tilapia, because most of those countries run tilapia, and you could then grow the likes of tomatoes, and he particularly grew tomatoes because of the nutrient demand that tomato bushes have. So that's what he set up, and his papers are really interesting with all the stuff he wrote. So we decided we'd do it here. So we set one up, and of course the idea being that we would have a system that did not require the addition of, you know, a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of something else, because that's something that started to happen with aquaponics. Because in aquaponics, there's 3 elements that don't come in easily into your system, and that is potassium, calcium, and iron. And they don't come in enough quantity in the fish food, because the primary source of nutrient for an aquaponic system is the fish food. That's where it comes in. And the fish, of course, consume that. It gets expelled in their waste, the leftovers from it. And of course, we derive our plant nutrients from that. And that's the 3 things that are short. And so I notice there's some businesses in the USA that spend a whole lot of time. That's their business. I shouldn't really knock it, I guess, but you know, they'll analyze something for you and tell you, oh, you need some more Uchi Buchi, or you need some more Poofty Woofty, or whatever. And so they'll sell you the various components to add to your aquaponic system. And fair enough, we don't like that approach. We take the shotgun approach, as we call it. And we're great believers in, I saw the previous speaker, the doctor you had, talking about humic acid, and also the addition of seaweed extract. And there's a couple of good ones around the world. There's one called Power Feed in Australia. There's, across the USA, you can get Maxi Crop with fish emulsion in it, which is very, very good. And if you run your aquaponic system with those, you simply don't need anything else. We've proved it over and over and over again. You don't need to be running around adding this and adding that and adding something else. That's, of course, with the exception of using calcium carbonate to adjust your pH. Okay, you need to do something like that. And of course, when you use calcium carbonate to adjust your pH, you also add calcium at the same time. So there you go. So the difference between hydroponics and aquaponics as far as nutrient uptake is concerned is, like the good doctor was talking about before, the soil microbes that are in soil release all those things that are captured in the soil so that they become plant available. And of course, in aquaponics, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to mimic soil. And that's why we're great believers in media beds, of course, growing our high-end plants in media beds. High-end, by high-end, I mean tomatoes, you know, that kind of thing, cucumbers, basically fruiting plants, and cannabis, if you want to grow that. It grows very, very well in media beds. And of course, after a little while, after the system has time to mature, your media bed becomes very, very soil-like in what happens. And you have all the beneficial microbes that you find in good soil start to become available to you in the media bed, and you have more and more nutrient release happening. And of course, then we mineralize the fish waste in order to extract more nutrients from it. And then anything you're short of that might be like potassium, for example, or iron, then you can get that from the Maxi Crop with fish emulsion or Power Feed, and it works very, very well. You don't have to run off wondering what you're going to add here and what you're going to add there. And interestingly enough, with the sand system that you asked about, Steve, We haven't had to add anything the entire, I think it's 2 years and 3 months now that system's been running since brand new. I have to admit, though, it was about 6 or 7 months before we started to get decent tomato crops out of it. And that's to be expected because it's a bit like any soil system. It takes a while to build up the soil. Now, why do we use sand? Sand is the perfect filter. You've got to get the right grade of sand. It has to be just coarse enough, not too fine, not too coarse, of course. And the water is pumped through the sand and settles through it, and the sand acts as a filter. Our pumping regime we have here, we found works well for us. It's 9 minutes on and 90 minutes off. So we've got a huge saving in pumping requirements. And in that off period, the water is returned from the sump via an airlift pump, which runs off a 60-watt airlift pump. We then have added to the system, for the sake of experimentation, a couple of large raft beds growing lettuce and other leafy greens in them. And the water is circulated through that back through the fish tank and the sump by the use of another airlift pump, which runs off the same 60-watt airlift pump, air pump. So only using 60 watts. And that enables us to run that system 24 hours a day off solar panels because our power consumption is very low. And the main pump that pumps from the fish tank to the sand beds, we turn off. We've got a photoelectric cell on that. So when the sun goes down, that pump no longer can pump. And of course, when the sun comes up in the morning, it'll have its first pump cycle. People may be wondering, how the fish fare during the night. They're fine. They go well because you've got good aeration going into the fish tank. And that's because the water is continually circulated from the sump back through the fish tank and via an overflow back to the sump again all night long. And the airlift pump is moving at the rate of about 20 litres, it's about 18 litres a minute of water is pumped through the fish tank at night. And that keeps the fish happy. There is a bit of a rise during the night in ammonia levels in the tank, but nothing that's dangerous. And that's exactly why, and I don't want to give away all my secrets, but that's why we added the raft beds to it and ran them at night as well, so that we could take up any of that additional ammonia that might be produced in the system or nitrates, for example, at night. So the system is running extraordinarily well, Steve. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, no, it was definitely interesting to see that. I know the people have been talking about it a long time, but not a lot of people have actually gone and actually done the mineral testing. So I'm super excited to learn more about your findings in the future.
Yeah, well, I'd really like to, if I was allowed to, I'd love to grow some cannabis in just to see how it goes. We found that it doesn't do so well with growing lettuce, etc., in the actual sand. And that's only a mechanical thing because the sand makes the lettuce dirty. Like when you harvest, if you're not really careful, you'll get this fine sand in the lettuce. Just little things like that are annoying, apart from anything else. But the lettuce grow fine. But we grow mostly tomatoes in it because that's a high-end crop as far as nutrient goes. And we've got tomato plants now that are the age of the system. They've been there ever since. We just prune them back a bit and away they go again. So we're doing that, of course, just to push it and to see how much we can actually get out of it.
Cool. Definitely interesting to hear about, and would definitely be cool to see what kind of microbials are colonizing that, because it is a kind of a different biome than most other types of mineralization processes.
Yes. And maintenance is fairly low in it too, we've found. One bed, we've never done any maintenance to it. We just let it run and see what happens. But the other 3 beds we have, 3 beds, we regularly, probably every 3 or 4 months, we run through with a piece of shaped timber and scrape the detritus off the top of the channels. And then we just replace it with a bit of fresh sand just to keep things nice and clean and fresh. And that works very, very well as well. Okay. Got any other questions, Steve?
You've grown a lot of different fruit trees and interesting larger plants as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? It's a question I've often heard people ask about from some of your work.
We still grow. We regularly grow papaya in our systems, in the gravel, in the media beds, and it grows extraordinarily well. We did grow bananas for a little while, and we did also grow some citrus for a while. And they went okay, but I came to the conclusion in the end that long life trees like citrus or apples or pears or whatever else you might decide you want to grow are best off not in an aquaponic system. And that's simply because you're relying on a pump. Because if you think about what is the main weakness in an aquaponic system, the weakness is the pump. The pump is the weak point. It's the major weak point that can fail and cause you difficulty. So, you know, if you're growing a tree that you want to keep for 20 plus years, you don't want to run that risk. So that's my conclusion anyway. Some others may disagree, but we now grow our citrus outside. We've finally transferred them out into wicking beds, and they're doing very well in wicking beds. We're about to transplant them again, actually, into larger wicking beds, so they can get a bit of a better go on. But we harvest a lot of citrus, you know, of all kinds from our citrus trees. Bananas don't grow very well where I live because we get frost in the wintertime, which tends to kill them off a little bit. But yeah, but papaya grows just like crazy. It goes extremely well. And I'm happy to keep doing that because papaya is not a long-lived plant. Usually a papaya tree is kind of had it after 2 years and, you know, just degenerates and doesn't bear much. So, you know, best to replant and, you know, grow your own seeds and from seeds and replant, and away you go. That's what we do anyway.
Awesome. Is there any maybe untraditional crops or crops maybe people haven't thought of normally that you think just are great for aquaponics that people should think more about growing?
Well, I think there's a huge future, and we've seen that with some clients we've got in the USA and in Portugal and Portland, Oregon, for example, has specialised in growing herbs, or herbs, I think you call them, like basil and cilantro and things like that can draw, you know, bring a good price to the markets. That particular business has expanded and has opened up another farm in Seattle, so they're doing well. So their specialty crops is the way to go, I think, because, you know, you want to get the highest possible price you can for the stuff you're producing in order to make sure you're financially successful, rather than trying to compete down at the bottom of the market by growing lettuce. Although I have to say, if anyone wants to go to the University of Virgin Islands website and look in their aquaculture department, not aquaponics department, aquaculture department, you'll come across all the papers that were written by Dr. James Riccozzi. And for the 20 plus years that they ran experiments there with the aquaponics grown in raft beds, the one they made the most money out of was lettuce, believe it or not. They made more money out of lettuce than anything else. And that's, I guess, because of sheer volume and ease of growing, quick turnover. You know, there's an old thing in agriculture or any kind of farming activity. The longer the crop takes to mature, the more chance you have of something going wrong. So the fast turnover crops are those that are most successful in the long run. Even though your price per item might be low, you can turn them over quickly with very few failures. And so that's a good thing, really. So that's the long and the short of what happened at the University of Virgin Islands and how they had their good success with lettuce, although they grew all sorts of things. And it's interesting to look through their list of stuff. They tried all sorts of things, okra and all the different melons you can think of and all sorts of things. Whatever food products you can think of, you can grow in an aquaponic system. Personally, myself, some people like to grow flowers as well, but I'm only interested in things I can eat, basically.
Is there any aquaponic myths you'd like to mention or address or talk about that you hear over and over again?
Well, there's one I hear over and over again that pops up in YouTube land, and that is that plants in aquaponics grow 10 times faster in half the time and twice the size. You heard that one? Comes across particularly from one particular website.
I haven't heard that particular claim, no, but that's quite a claim.
Yeah, it is, because if you did the mathematics on that, you just have to put the seed in and run for your life because you'd be overtaken by the plant. You know, plants in aquaponics, you know, and people say they grow twice as fast even. It's not true, really. What they'll grow at the rate and the quality they should grow at. And that is because they always have nutrient and they always have water. Because in any traditional gardening situation, the plant is often, you know, water hungry, a little bit water hungry. The farmer might irrigate Mondays and Fridays, for example, or whatever. And so you've got that in-between period where the plant is a little bit water, you know, a little bit water short. So the plant slows down a little bit. Same with nutrients, you know, unless you've got really good quality soil, and I mean really good quality soil, the plant's always going to be a little bit shy. So, you know, when you do it properly, the plants will grow the way they're meant to grow. So for that reason, they'll often look like they grow twice as fast as the ones you've seen already that don't grow all that well because they're not in ideal conditions. And of course, the other way to grow things in an ideal way, of course, is hydroponics, as we all know. Hydroponics will, if you do it well, you'll get extraordinary growth in hydroponics as well.
I can tell you, at least from all the trials that we've done, cannabis and veg will grow about twice as fast in terms of inches per day and node development in veg. And then on the flowering time, we can actually save about 7 to 14%, 7 to 15% off the flowering time. So again, it just like you're saying, it optimizes the plant and makes them fully ready, increases their secondary metabolites and other things that help increase senescence and flowering rates. And just make the plant as healthy as it can be, more than it is as like a growth accelerator or some kind of thing like that. Some people kind of
magic potion.
Yeah.
And you find that's the same with cannabis, do you, Steve? Exactly the same?
Yeah, no, it definitely grows faster. You know, for soil, most people are getting 1 to 3 inches of growth per day in veg on a warm day. On aquaponics, we can easily hit 3 or 4 inches a day without trying, and sometimes even more than that with proper node spacing, like you're saying. Fully developed, not just stretching for the sky, but actual full development. And we've shown pictures of that. You can go back, excuse me, on my YouTube channel and look at live streams where we've gone to the same room the next day, and you can see a visual difference in the room. So
that's remarkable, isn't it? I just think it's amazing. When you give nature what it needs, it is extremely abundant. It's amazing what you can grow as far as food supply goes. And in this day and age of COVID around the world, we're finding we've got a real upsurge in people being interested in actually building their own systems. We've got a lot of inquiries now from all over the place for our kits, which we stopped building because we thought that was kind of past, that people would do it all themselves. But now we're getting inquiries for kits because people are worried about food security. And I think it's a reasonable thing to worry about too, quite frankly, especially in the USA when you've got this, it looks like, by what I see on the news anyway, you've got a lot of inflation starting to happen, and it's going to be harder and harder for people to make ends meet. People are on the lower end of the income level. So might pay to start growing some of your own veggies at home if you're lucky enough to have a backyard, that is. And you'll be amazed how many you can grow in such a small space.
Oh yeah, definitely a good time to start stashing seeds if you aren't already, because being able to provide for yourself and grow your own stuff is certainly going to become more and more valuable as the world keeps turning and things keep changing, especially with climate change.
The one thing that amazes me about that is a particular variety of purple beans, climbing beans we like to grow here. And we just plant one seed at a time. It's kind of a little bit of an exercise. And just out of one bean seed, when the bean starts to grow and mature, you can pick a sizable handful of beans every day of that for about 3 months. And, for an average family of 2 or 3 people, you're flat out trying to eat a handful of beans every day, cook them up and put them with your veggies and your steak or your fish or whatever you're going to eat. So, nature is amazingly abundant. And that's what I'm always amazed at. Okay, Steve, that's about all I got for you, mate. I'm sorry. I've run out.
No worries. Did you want to tell everybody how to find out more about you and your education? And you have a great website with a forum that's quite a few years old, with lots of other people's questions that people can go back and read about, and all kinds of great resources.
Yeah, I've just put into the chat screen our website, aquaponics.net.au. And the other one we've got is I can't type and talk to you, sorry. aquaponicsdesigncourse.com, and look for us on Facebook as well. Our Facebook page, I haven't checked the numbers for a few days, but last I checked, we had 670,000 followers. Now, can you imagine that? 670,000 followers. It's amazing. And that's nothing special about me in particular. It just shows the worldwide interest there is in aquaponics. And of course, we feed the beast, as we call it. We post something there at least every second day, and have done now for 5 years. And that's resulted in massive growth in the interest on the website. And of course, looking at the back end of it, we know that we have about 25,000 people a day go through that Facebook page, which is really, really interesting, looking at aquaponics and all that kind of thing. And so we're very happy to feature any of you out there listening. If you've got, you're doing something remarkable on your farm, even if it's just a little tiny farm, even a backyard thing, we're very happy if you take photographs. We'll feature it on our Facebook page for you. Not a problem. We're happy to drive traffic to other people who do that, and we do that regularly for people on our Facebook page. So please send me an email with your photographs and stuff that you're doing, and we will pop it on our Facebook page, and you can be absolutely certain that you will get a heck of a lot of feedback from it. We had one person recently we did that for, and they claim, I don't know if it's true or not, but they claimed they had over 3,000 visitors to their web page over the next 2 weeks, and their normal visitors were around about 100 a day if they're lucky. So, there's an awful lot of people out there looking at our Facebook page, and that's just Aquaponics design.
Awesome. Well, any last advice for people looking to get started in aquaponics?
Make sure you get some training, and I guess you might expect me to say that, but we find that people go off half-cocked. They go and look at stuff on YouTube, and obviously you can learn from YouTube if you're discerning enough to sort the rubbish from the truth. But unfortunately, in today's world, a number of years ago, if you wanted to publish something, you had to write a manuscript, then you had to go and see a publisher, and he would read it and tell you if it was a load of rubbish or not. And it had to be pretty good before you could get it published. Whereas these days, anyone can be a publisher, and you see it on YouTube all the time. Someone got 3 old rusty buckets and a ball of string and a couple of rubber bands, and they put together an aquaponic system, and next thing they got it all on the internet telling everyone how to do it, and they've been doing it for a whole 3 weeks. And unfortunately, if you're not discerning enough to sort that kind of thing out, you can get a lot of bum steers. It pays to. We have it all the time. People come and do our course, and after they've done it, people have been doing aquaponics for 5, 6, 7 years, and they do our course and they say, best thing I ever did. Not only because of knowledge that I've gained through my travels, but our students. We've got in the back of the software, we've got a community section, we call it, which is an old-fashioned forum actually, and the students post their stuff in there, little systems they've made, and they share knowledge. So there's an enormous amount of data available and information like that. We would really like, Steve, to be able to increase the amount of interest in cannabis growing and get more students to do that, so that can be shared around a lot more. That would be a really good thing to happen, I think.
That would be great. Yeah, we'll definitely have to talk about that after the conference for sure.
Yeah. Yes, it's a good thing to do. Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's quite the time difference from the West Coast to Australia, so I do appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Well, it's just coming up 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday afternoon here, so I could probably spend a little while and tell you what tomorrow's news is.
Yeah, what are the lottery numbers? Hurry.
Yeah, the lottery numbers would be good. Yeah, I'm looking for them myself, actually. So thanks, Steve. Great to be able to be part of your little world, your big world. I shouldn't say little world. Great to be part of your world again, and I really admire what you're doing, and I wish you and all your people the greatest of success, and may we all do the best we can to promote good food growth and good product growth and as much sustainability as we possibly can.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the conference and help educate people a little bit more about aquaponics around the world. It really does mean a lot. So thanks a lot.
You're welcome.